I never imagined that buying my dream house in Maple Grove, Arizona, would turn into a legal nightmare. But the moment I watched Patricia Whitmore dump 3 bags of rotting garbage onto my perfectly manicured lawn at 6 in the morning, I knew this suburban war was about to escalate beyond anyone's expectations. Let me back up a few weeks. My name is Xavier Rollins, and I had just closed on a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in the Sundance Hills subdivision. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I toured it. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained properties, and that quintessential American suburb vibe I had been craving after years of apartment living in downtown Phoenix. The HOA seemed reasonable during the buying process. Just the standard rules about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and parking regulations. What the paperwork didn't mention was that the HOA president, Patricia Whitmore, was a 52-year-old nightmare who treated the neighborhood covenants like they were handed down from Mount Sinai. My first encounter with Patricia happened during my second week in the house. I was unloading groceries from my truck when she appeared at the end of my driveway, clipboard in hand, wearing a visor despite the cloudy weather and an expression that suggested she smelled something rotten. "You must be the new owner," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that immediately puts you on guard. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, HOA president. Welcome to Sundance Hills." "Xavier Rollins," I replied, setting down a bag and extending my hand. She shook it limply, already scanning my property with narrowed eyes. "I notice you haven't installed your house numbers yet. Section 3.2 of the HOA covenant requires all homes to display their address numbers in the approved font and size within 10 days of closing." She tapped her clipboard. "You have 5 days left." I glanced at my garage where the numbers were clearly visible. "The numbers are right there. Those are garage numbers. You need them on the house itself, next to the front door in brushed nickel 4 inches tall Helvetica font." She smiled tightly. "I'll email you the approved vendor list." That should have been my first warning sign, but I chalked it up to someone who took their volunteer position a bit too seriously. I ordered the stupid numbers, installed them exactly to specification, and figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The violations started piling up. My trash can was visible from the street for 20 minutes after the garbage truck left. Violation. I planted petunias instead of the approved marigolds in my front flower bed. Violation. My lawn was supposedly 1/4 inch too tall, though when I measured it myself, it was well within the 2 to 3 inch requirement. Still a violation. Each infraction came with a formal letter, printed on official HOA letterhead, and a fine ranging from $50 to $200. I tried being reasonable. I called Patricia to discuss what I felt were unfair accusations. She listened with obvious impatience before informing me that all violations were documented with photographic evidence, and that I could appeal to the HOA board if I wished, though she warned that frivolous appeals would result in additional fines. The board, as I later learned, consisted of Patricia and 2 of her close friends who rubber-stamped everything she said. I paid the first few fines, hoping to keep the peace. I replaced the petunias, set alarms to ensure my trash can was never visible for more than the allowed 15 minutes, and obsessively measured my grass. But Patricia seemed to take my compliance as an invitation to scrutinize my property even more closely. She started walking past my house multiple times a day, sometimes with her phone out, clearly photographing anything she deemed problematic. The breaking point came when I decided to park my work truck in my driveway overnight. I'm a general contractor, and the truck, a white Ford F-250 with my company name on the side, is essential to my business. According to the HOA rules, commercial vehicles were prohibited from being parked in driveways between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. I found this rule ridiculous since half the neighborhood had vehicles that could technically be classified as commercial, but were personal trucks. Still, I mostly complied, parking the truck at my office and driving my personal car home. One night, I had an emergency call for a burst pipe at a client's house. I got home at 2 in the morning, exhausted and covered in grime, and parked the truck in my driveway, intending to move it first thing in the morning. I woke up at 5:30 to find an orange violation sticker plastered on my windshield and a $200 fine notice in my mailbox. Patricia must have been patrolling the neighborhood in the middle of the night like some kind of suburban vigilante. I was furious. I called her at 7 a.m., probably waking her up, though her voice sounded annoyingly alert. "Patricia, this is getting ridiculous," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I had an emergency work situation. The truck was in my driveway for a few hours. This is my home, and I should be able to park my work vehicle occasionally without being treated like a criminal." "The rules are very clear, Xavier," she replied, her tone maddeningly calm. "Commercial vehicles are not permitted in driveways overnight. No exceptions. If you can't follow the rules, perhaps Sundance Hills isn't the right community for you. Are you seriously suggesting I should sell my house because I parked my truck in my own driveway? I'm suggesting you follow the covenants you agreed to when you purchased your property. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a neighborhood to manage." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, shaking with anger. That's when I decided I needed legal representation. This wasn't about house numbers or flower varieties anymore. This was harassment. I contacted Mitchell Hayes, an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in Scottsdale, about 30 minutes from Maple Grove, and he had a reputation for not backing down from overzealous homeowner associations. When I laid out the timeline of violations and fines, he listened carefully, taking notes. "How much have you paid in fines so far?" Mitchell asked. "About $800 in 6 weeks, he whistled low. "And you've documented everything, kept all the violation notices?" "Every single one." "Good. Here's what we're going to do. First, I'm going to send a formal letter to the HOA board informing them that you're now represented by counsel and that all future communications should go through my office. Second, we're going to request copies of all violation reports filed in the neighborhood over the past year. I have a feeling you're being singled out, and if we can prove selective enforcement, we have a strong case. What about the fines I've already paid? We'll address those in due time. For now, don't pay any new fines until we review them, and document everything. If Patricia Whitmore so much as looks at your property wrong, I want photos, videos, timestamps, everything." I left Mitchell's office feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. The legal fees weren't cheap, but the principle of the matter was worth it. I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president bully me out of my own home. Mitchell sent his letter the next day. I got a copy for my records, and it was beautiful, professional yet firm, laying out the excessive violations and fines while hinting at potential legal action if the harassment continued. I imagined Patricia's face when she received it, and for the first time since moving in, I felt like I had some control over the situation. Her response was not what I expected. 2 days after Mitchell's letter was delivered, I left for work at 6:30 in the morning. When I returned home at 4 p.m., my front yard was covered in garbage. Not just a bag or two, but 3 large black contractor bags that had been ripped open. Their contents spread across my lawn like some kind of twisted art installation. Rotting food, used coffee filters, eggshells, moldy bread, empty cans, and things I didn't want to identify too closely. The smell hit me before I even got out of my car. I sat in my driveway, staring at the mess in disbelief. My first thought was that kids had vandalized my property, maybe as a prank. But as I got out and walked closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sticking out from under a pile of orange peels was an envelope with Patricia Whitmore's return address on it. I pulled it out carefully, using a stick so I wouldn't have to touch the garbage directly. It was a credit card offer addressed to Patricia Whitmore at 1247 Sycamore Lane, 3 houses down from mine. She had done this. The HOA president had dumped her garbage on my lawn. I immediately called Mitchell, my hands shaking as I explained what happened. He told me not to touch anything and to call the police to file a report. Then he said to document everything with photos and video from multiple angles, making sure to capture the envelope with Patricia's address clearly visible. The Maple Grove Police Department sent an officer within an hour. Officer Ramirez was a middle-aged guy with a calm demeanor who looked genuinely sympathetic as he surveyed my garbage-covered lawn. "So you think you know who did this?" he asked, pen poised over his notepad. "I know who did it," I said, showing him the envelope. "That's the HOA president's mail. She lives 3 houses down. We've been having disputes about HOA violations, and I recently hired a lawyer. This is clearly retaliation." Officer Ramirez photographed the envelope and took a statement. "Technically, this is illegal dumping and possibly criminal mischief. I can go talk to Miss Whitmore, but unless she admits to it or someone saw her do it, it might be hard to prove." "I have security cameras," I said suddenly, remembering the Ring doorbell I had installed the previous week. "They should have caught something." We went inside and I pulled up the footage on my phone. Sure enough, at 6:15 that morning, just 15 minutes before I left for work, the video showed Patricia Whitmore's white Lexus pulling up to my curb. The camera angle captured her getting out, pulling 3 large bags from her trunk and dumping them onto my lawn. She even looked directly at the camera at one point, either not noticing it or not caring. "Well, that makes my job easier," Officer Ramirez said, watching the video. "Can you send that to me? I'm going to pay Miss Whitmore a visit." I sent him the video file and he headed down the street. I called Mitchell again to update him, and he sounded almost gleeful. "She dumped her own garbage with her identifying information in it, and you have video evidence. Xavier, this woman just handed us a gift. Don't clean anything up yet. I'm sending our investigator to take additional photos for the civil case. After the police are done, save some of that garbage as evidence. You want me to keep rotting garbage? Just a bag's worth. Seal it up, date it, and store it somewhere. It's evidence of property damage and harassment." About 30 minutes later, Officer Ramirez returned with Patricia in tow. She was still wearing her visor and had her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Her face was red, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "Miss Whitmore has something to say to you," Officer Ramirez said firmly. Patricia's jaw worked for a moment before she spat out. "I'm sorry for leaving trash on your property. It was inappropriate." "Why did you do it?" I asked, genuinely wanting to understand her thought process. "You were making a mockery of this community with your constant violations, and now bringing lawyers into it. I wanted you to understand what it's like to have someone else's problems dumped on you. So you committed a crime, because I hired a lawyer to address what I believe is harassment." Officer Ramirez held up a hand. "Mr. Rollins, Miss Whitmore has admitted to illegal dumping. You have the option to press charges, which would be a misdemeanor, or you can handle this civilly. Given your ongoing legal situation, You might want to consult with your attorney before deciding." Patricia's eyes widened. "Press charges? Over some garbage? Are you insane?" "You dumped 3 bags of rotting trash on my lawn as retaliation for me exercising my legal rights," I said, my voice cold. "What did you think would happen?" "I'll clean it up right now," she said quickly. "And I'll waive the outstanding fines. We can forget this whole thing happened." "That's not how this works," Officer Ramirez said. "Mr. Rollins, you don't have to decide right now. I'm writing up a report and you have up to a year to press charges for this offense if you choose to." "Miss Whitmore, I strongly suggest you have no further contact with Mr. Rollins except through official HOA business or his attorney." After they left, I called Mitchell for the 3rd time that day. He laughed when I told him about Patricia's offer to waive the fines. "Don't accept anything from her directly. We're going to use this incident to build a case for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. With the video evidence and her admission to police, we have her dead to rights. I'm going to draft a formal response to return her garbage to her property, along with a cease and desist letter." "Wait, you want me to give her garbage back to her?" "Absolutely. She dumped it on your property illegally. You're simply returning her belongings. But we're going to do it properly, with documentation and my letter attached, so there's no question about legality. It'll send a clear message that you're not backing down." I liked the way this man thought. The next morning, Mitchell's investigator arrived at 8 a.m. Her name was Carla, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who photographed every inch of my garbage-covered lawn from dozens of angles. She used a professional camera and took measurements, noting the approximate volume of garbage and cataloging visible items. The whole process took nearly 2 hours. "This is actually one of the more blatant cases of HOA retaliation I've documented," Carla said as she packed up her equipment. "Usually, they're more subtle, fining people into submission. But dumping garbage on someone's lawn, that's bold, and boldness makes for strong evidence." After Carla left, I spent the afternoon carefully collecting the garbage. I wore gloves and used contractor bags, separating out one bag that contained the most identifying items, including several more pieces of mail addressed to Patricia. Mitchell had arranged for a legal service company to handle the official return of the garbage, but he wanted me to prepare it first. That evening, Mitchell sent me the letter he had drafted. It was perfect, professional, and cutting at the same time. "Dear Miss Whitmore, on behalf of my client, Xavier Rollins, I am writing to formally return personal property that was illegally deposited on his premises located at 1263 Sycamore Lane on the morning of November 8th. Said property, consisting of approximately 3 bags of household waste bearing your identifying information, was placed on Mr. Rollins' property without authorization, in violation of Arizona Revised Statutes Section 13-1603, criminal littering, and Section 13-1602, criminal trespass. This incident has been documented by law enforcement, Maple Grove Police Department case number 2024-1847, and supported by video surveillance evidence. This letter serves as official notice that any further acts of harassment, retaliation, or unauthorized entry onto Mr. Rollins' property will result in immediate legal action, including but not limited to criminal complaints and civil litigation for damages. Additionally, we are formally notifying you and the Sundance Hills HOA Board that we will be pursuing legal remedies for the pattern of harassment, selective enforcement of HOA covenants, and excessive fines that Mr. Rollins has endured since purchasing his property. We demand immediate cessation of all retaliatory actions and look forward to resolving this matter in a professional manner. The personal property referenced above will be returned to your residence at 1247 Sycamore Lane on November 10th by authorized delivery service. Sincerely, Mitchell Hayes-esque. On November 10th, a process server named Derek arrived at my house at 9 a.m. He was a stocky guy with a no-nonsense attitude who clearly enjoyed his job. "So I hear we're delivering garbage today," he said with a grin. "This is a first for me, but I love it." I had prepared 3 bags of garbage, carefully resealing them to prevent spillage during transport. Derek loaded them into his van along with Mitchell's letter in a manila envelope. "I'll take photos of the delivery and get her signature confirming receipt," Derek said. "If she refuses to sign, I'll leave them on her porch and document that too. Either way, she's getting her garbage back." I desperately wanted to go with him, to see Patricia's face when her own trash was returned with a lawyer's letter attached, but Mitchell had advised against any direct contact. Instead, I waited anxiously at home, refreshing my email every few minutes. Derek called me 20 minutes later, barely able to contain his laughter. "Man, you should have seen her face." She opened the door all smug, like she was expecting a package, and then I told her I was delivering property she left at your residence. When she saw the garbage bags, she turned purple, started yelling about how this was ridiculous and she wasn't accepting them. I put them on her porch, handed her the letter, and told her to have a nice day. She was still screaming when I left. "Did you get photos? Full documentation. Your lawyer will have everything within the hour." I felt a surge of satisfaction that probably wasn't entirely healthy, but I didn't care. Patricia had tried to humiliate me, and now she knew I wasn't someone who would just roll over. The neighborhood gossip mill went into overdrive. By that afternoon, several neighbors I had never spoken to stopped by to ask what was going on. Apparently, Patricia had been calling people all day, trying to paint me as some kind of unhinged aggressor who was harassing her. But word about the garbage incident had gotten out, and several neighbors admitted they had also felt bullied by Patricia's aggressive enforcement of HOA rules. One neighbor, an elderly man named Frank who lived 2 doors down, was particularly forthcoming. "That woman has been a nightmare since she became president 3 years ago," Frank said, sitting on my porch and accepting the coffee I offered. "She fined my wife for hanging a wreath that was supposedly too large, even though it was the same size as 5 other wreaths on the block. When we challenged her on it, she started finding violations for everything. Our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Our porch light was too bright. Our car was parked 6 inches over the driveway edge. We ended up paying over $1,000 in fines before we just gave up and did whatever she wanted." "Why didn't anyone vote her out?" Frank sighed. "Most people are afraid of her. She's vindictive, and she has the backing of her friends on the board. The few times someone has run against her, she's campaigned hard, spreading rumors about them, claiming they want to eliminate all the rules and turn the neighborhood into a slum. It works because people bought here for the nice appearance, and they're scared of property values dropping." "Has anyone tried suing the HOA before?" One family did, about 2 years ago. They had a similar situation, constant violations, excessive fines. They hired a lawyer, and the HOA ended up settling out of court for an undisclosed amount. The family moved away shortly after. I think Patricia learned from that experience because she's been more careful about documentation since then, making everything look official and justified even when it's clearly targeted. This was valuable information. I called Mitchell immediately after Frank left and relayed everything. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think we need to expand this case. If there's a pattern of behavior, we might be able to go after the HOA as an entity, not just Patricia personally. That could mean bigger damages and real structural change in how the organization operates. What would that look like? We'd need more witnesses, people willing to testify about their experiences. We'd also need to review HOA records, meeting minutes, financial documents, enforcement patterns across the whole neighborhood. It's a bigger case, which means more time and money, but it also means we could potentially get the entire board removed and force a reorganization. Let's do it, I said without hesitation. This isn't just about me anymore. If Patricia has been terrorizing the whole neighborhood, someone needs to stop her. Over the next week, Mitchell's office began reaching out to other residents. Carla, the investigator, conducted interviews with anyone willing to talk. Out of the 48 homes in Sundance Hills, she found 17 families who reported similar patterns of harassment, excessive fines, and selective enforcement. Some stories were worse than mine. One family had been fined repeatedly for their son's wheelchair ramp, which Patricia claimed violated the architectural guidelines, despite the ramp being medically necessary and legally protected under fair housing laws. Another resident, a single mother, had been fined for her children's toys being visible in the yard, even though the HOA covenants only prohibited toys from being left out overnight, and she always brought them in before dark. Mitchell compiled all this information into a comprehensive filing. On November 20th, we filed a lawsuit against Patricia Whitmore personally and the Sundance Hills HOA, alleging harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of fair housing laws, and breach of fiduciary duty. We also filed a motion for injunctive relief, asking the court to temporarily suspend Patricia's authority as HOA president pending the outcome of the case. The lawsuit made local news. A reporter from the Maple Grove Gazette contacted me for an interview, and after checking with Mitchell, I agreed to speak with her. The article, titled "Homeowner Fights Back Against Alleged HOA Harassment," ran on the front page of the local section. It included interviews with 3 other residents who corroborated the pattern of selective enforcement and detailed the garbage dumping incident. Patricia's response was to file a countersuit, claiming defamation and emotional distress. Her complaint alleged that I had orchestrated a campaign to smear her reputation, and that the lawsuit was frivolous and intended to harm her standing in the community. Mitchell read it and actually laughed. "This is going to backfire on her spectacularly," he said. "We have documented evidence of everything: police reports, video footage, testimony from multiple residents. Her countersuit is baseless, and filing it just makes her look more vindictive. We're going to file a motion to dismiss with prejudice and ask for sanctions." While the legal proceedings moved forward, life in Sundance Hills became increasingly tense. The neighborhood was divided between those who supported my fight against Patricia and those who felt I was causing unnecessary drama. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on my garage door one night, though I couldn't prove who did it. I installed additional security cameras around my property and kept my doors locked at all times. Patricia, for her part, seemed to become more unhinged as the case progressed. According to Frank and other neighbors, she was now patrolling the neighborhood at all hours, documenting violations with increased fervor. She sent out a mass email to all residents, claiming that my lawsuit was threatening the HOA's financial stability and might result in special assessments for everyone to cover legal fees. Mitchell immediately sent a cease and desist letter about this communication, arguing it was an attempt to intimidate witnesses and turn the community against me. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 15th. Mitchell explained that this would be our opportunity to present evidence for the injunctive relief motion, essentially asking the judge to remove Patricia from her position while the full case proceeded. We spent hours preparing, reviewing documentation, and lining up witnesses. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. This case had consumed my life for months, and the stress was taking its toll. I had lost weight, wasn't sleeping well, and found myself constantly anxious about what Patricia might do next. Part of me wondered if it would have been easier to just sell the house and move, but I kept coming back to the principle of the thing. I had done nothing wrong. I had followed the rules, paid my HOA dues, and tried to be a good neighbor. I shouldn't have to uproot my life because someone on a power trip couldn't handle being challenged. The courthouse in downtown Maple Grove was a modest building, nothing like the imposing structures you see on legal dramas. Mitchell met me outside at 8 a.m., carrying 2 briefcases full of documents. "Ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, let me do the talking. If the judge asks you a direct question, answer honestly and concisely. Don't let emotions take over, even if Patricia or her lawyer says something that makes you angry." We entered the courtroom, and I immediately spotted Patricia sitting with her attorney, a severe-looking woman in an expensive suit. Patricia was dressed conservatively, her hair styled perfectly, playing the role of the responsible community leader. When she saw me, her expression hardened. Judge Ramona Velasquez entered, and we all stood. She was a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority. After we sat, she reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding the plaintiff's motion for injunctive relief in the matter of Rollins versus Whitmore and Sundance Hills Homeowners Association. Mr. Hayes, you may present your argument." Mitchell stood, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are seeking temporary removal of the defendant Patricia Whitmore from her position as HOA president due to a documented pattern of harassment, retaliation, and abuse of authority. We will demonstrate through video evidence, police reports, and testimony from multiple residents that Ms. Whitmore has engaged in conduct that is not only harmful to my client but detrimental to the entire community she purports to serve." He proceeded to lay out the timeline, starting with my move into the neighborhood and the escalating violations. He showed the Ring doorbell footage of Patricia dumping garbage on my lawn, introduced the police report, and presented photographs of the damage. Then he called Frank as a witness. Frank testified about his own experiences with Patricia, describing the excessive fines and targeted enforcement. Mitchell then called 2 other residents who told similar stories. One of them, a woman named Sandra, broke down in tears as she described being fined repeatedly for her son's wheelchair ramp and feeling like she was being pushed out of her own home. Patricia's attorney, whose name was Margaret Foster, tried to discredit the witnesses, suggesting they were coordinating their stories and had ulterior motives for supporting my lawsuit. But her cross-examinations only seemed to make the witnesses more sympathetic. When it was the defense's turn, Margaret called Patricia to the stand. Under oath, Patricia maintained that she was simply enforcing the HOA covenants as written and that I was a problem resident who refused to follow rules. "Miss Whitmore," Margaret said, "can you explain the incident involving garbage on Mr. Rollins' property?" Patricia took a deep breath, looking contrite. "I made a terrible mistake. I was under enormous stress, dealing with Mr. Rollins' constant challenges to my authority and his refusal to comply with basic community standards. I snapped. I'm not proud of it, and I apologized immediately." But one moment of poor judgment doesn't erase 3 years of dedicated service to this community. Mitchell's cross-examination was surgical. Miss Whitmore, you testified that you apologized immediately after the garbage incident. Is that correct? Yes. But you only apologized after the police came to your door with video evidence, correct? Patricia hesitated. Yes, and your apology was only given in the presence of a police officer, not voluntarily. Correct, I suppose, but Miss Whitmore, how many violation notices did you issue to Mr. Rollins in his first 2 months of residence? I don't have the exact number. Your records show 18 violation notices in 8 weeks. Does that sound accurate? If that's what the records show, then yes. And how many notices did you issue to other residents during that same period? Margaret stood. Objection, relevance. Your Honor, this goes directly to the pattern of selective enforcement we're alleging, Mitchell said. I'll allow it, Judge Velasquez said. Miss Whitmore, please answer. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure of the exact number. Your records indicate 6 notices total to all other residents during that 8-week period. So Mr. Rollins received 3 times as many violations as the rest of the neighborhood combined. Does that seem like fair and even enforcement to you? Mr. Rollins' property had more issues like planting petunias instead of marigolds, having his trash visible for 20 minutes instead of 15, parking his work truck in his own driveway during an emergency. Mitchell's voice was sharp now. Miss Whitmore, isn't it true that you targeted Mr. Rollins because he challenged your authority? No, that's not true. Then explain the garbage incident. You testified you were stressed by his challenges to your authority. How is that not retaliation? Patricia's face flushed. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. People make mistakes, Miss Whitmore, but community leaders are held to higher standards. You violated the law, committed criminal acts against a resident you were supposed to serve, and only expressed remorse when caught. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of behavior. Judge Velasquez called for a brief recess after Mitchell finished. We stood in the hallway and Mitchell looked cautiously optimistic. I think that went well, he said. Patricia came across as defensive and vindictive, exactly what we needed. Now we wait for the judge's decision. After the recess, Judge Velasquez returned and addressed the courtroom. I've reviewed the evidence presented today, and I find the plaintiff's motion for injunctive relief to be well-founded. The video evidence of Miss Whitmore's actions, combined with testimony from multiple residents about selective enforcement and retaliatory behavior, demonstrates a clear pattern of conduct that is harmful to the community. Therefore, I am granting the motion. Patricia Whitmore is hereby temporarily removed from her position as president of the Sundance Hills Homeowners Association, pending the outcome of the full trial. The HOA board is directed to appoint an interim president within 14 days. Furthermore, all fines assessed against Mr. Rollins are suspended pending review by the interim board and determination of their validity. This court will reconvene for the full trial on March 3rd. The gavel came down, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't complete victory, but it was vindication. Patricia's face was ashen as she stood, and Margaret Foster was already whispering urgently in her ear. Outside the courthouse, several of the neighbors who had testified waited for me. Frank shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for doing this," he said. "Someone needed to stand up to her, and you did." Sandra hugged me, tears still in her eyes. "Maybe now we can actually enjoy living in our homes again." The local news picked up the story again, and this time the headline was more dramatic. Judge removes HOA president after garbage dumping incident. The article detailed the hearing and included statements from witnesses. The reporter had also obtained comment from several legal experts who opined that this case could set precedent for how HOA disputes are handled in Arizona. But the story was far from over. 3 days after the hearing, I received a disturbing call from Frank. His voice was shaking. "Xavier, you need to know something. Patricia held a secret meeting last night at her house with some of the residents who still support her. My neighbor Betty was there, and she told me what happened. Patricia is telling people that the judge was biased, that you bribed witnesses, and that she's going to make sure you regret ever moving here. Betty said Patricia seemed, I don't know, unbalanced. She was talking about how she's dedicated her life to the neighborhood, and you're destroying everything she built. This was concerning. A person who felt they had nothing left to lose could be dangerous. Thanks for letting me know, Frank. I'll tell my lawyer and maybe contact the police to have them increase patrols on my street." That night, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. I double-checked all my locks and made sure my security cameras were working properly. Around 11 p.m., I was watching television when I heard a noise outside, like something scraping against my garage door. I pulled up the security camera app on my phone and felt my stomach drop. Patricia was in my driveway, spray painting something on my garage door. I immediately called 911. "I have someone vandalizing my property right now," I told the dispatcher, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have video of her doing it. She's the subject of a restraining order." "Wait, no, sorry. There's no restraining order, but there's an ongoing lawsuit and she's not supposed to contact me. Officers are on their way. Please stay inside and don't confront the individual." I watched through the camera as Patricia continued spray painting. She was writing something, but from the angle, I couldn't make out what it said. After about 2 minutes, she stepped back, looked at her work, then got in her car and drove away. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I showed them the video footage, and Officer Ramirez, who I recognized from the garbage incident, shook his head in disbelief. "She just doesn't learn, does she?" he said. "Let's take a look at what she wrote." We walked out to the garage and I felt a chill when I saw the message. In red spray paint, 4 feet tall, she had written, "You destroyed my life." "That's definitely criminal damage," Officer Ramirez said, photographing the graffiti. "Combined with the video evidence and the prior incident, we're looking at possible stalking charges too. The prosecutor is going to want to talk to you." "Will she be arrested?" "Tonight, yes. We'll pick her up based on the video evidence. Whether she stays in custody or posts bail is up to the court." I called Mitchell, even though it was late. He answered on the second ring and I explained what happened. "Forward me all the video footage immediately," he said, his voice alert despite the hour. "This changes everything. Patricia has now committed multiple crimes against you, and she's shown she's willing to escalate. We're going to file for an emergency order of protection first thing tomorrow morning, and we're going to push for criminal stalking charges. This woman needs to be stopped before someone gets hurt." I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. The next morning, Mitchell filed the emergency order of protection, and by noon, a judge had granted it. Patricia was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my property, from contacting me directly or indirectly, and from making any statements about me on social media or in public forums. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office charged Patricia with criminal damage, criminal trespass, and stalking. Her bail was set at $10,000, which she posted, but the conditions of her release included staying away from me and surrendering any weapons. The neighborhood was in complete turmoil. The HOA board, now operating without Patricia, held an emergency meeting to appoint an interim president. They chose a retired accountant named George Marsh, who immediately announced that he would be reviewing all fines and violations issued in the past year and implementing new procedures to ensure fair enforcement. George called me personally to apologize for what I had gone through and to inform me that after reviewing the violations against me, the board had determined that 16 of the 18 were issued without proper justification. The 2 remaining violations, relating to my house numbers and a legitimate grass height issue on one occasion, stood, but the fines were reduced to the minimum allowed under the covenants. My total liability went from $1,800 to $100. We're also going to be revising our enforcement procedures, George said. Moving forward, all violations will require approval from 2 board members before being issued, and residents will have a clear appeal process that doesn't involve the person who issued the violation. What happened to you and others should never have been allowed to occur. This was progress, but I was still dealing with the trauma of Patricia's actions. I found myself constantly anxious, checking my security cameras obsessively and having trouble sleeping. Mitchell suggested I document these effects for the civil case, as they would support damages for emotional distress. The criminal trial for Patricia was scheduled for February 10th. As the victim, I was required to testify. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Amanda Chen, met with me several times to prepare. The defense is going to try to paint you as the aggressor, Amanda explained. They'll say Patricia was under extreme stress because you were harassing her with frivolous lawsuits. They'll try to make the jury sympathize with her as a dedicated volunteer who just snapped under pressure. We need to stay focused on her actions, which were criminal regardless of her mental state or stressors. The criminal trial was held in the Maricopa County Superior Court in Phoenix. The courtroom was larger and more formal than the one in Maple Grove. Patricia sat at the defense table looking smaller somehow, diminished. She had aged noticeably in the months since this all began, her face drawn and tired. Amanda presented the case methodically. She showed the video of Patricia dumping garbage on my lawn, then the video of her spray painting my garage. She called Officer Ramirez to testify about both incidents and introduced all the police reports. She called me to the stand and walked me through the timeline of harassment, the escalating fines, and the fear I felt after the vandalism incident. Patricia's attorney, a different lawyer this time, tried to establish that I had provoked her actions through my lawsuit and challenges to her authority. But every time he suggested I had done something wrong, Amanda objected, pointing out that exercising legal rights and challenging HOA decisions were not provocations for criminal behavior. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Thomas Morrison sentenced Patricia to 180 days in jail, suspended to probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and restitution for the cost of cleaning my lawn and repainting my garage, which totaled $2,400. But more importantly, Patricia was now a convicted criminal. This would have significant implications for the civil case. Mitchell wasted no time. With Patricia's criminal conviction in hand, he filed an amended complaint in the civil case, adding punitive damages and increasing our demand for compensation. The civil trial was scheduled for late March, but 2 weeks before it was set to begin, Margaret Foster reached out to Mitchell with a settlement offer. The HOA's insurance company, recognizing the liability they faced, was willing to pay $85,000 to settle all claims. Patricia would be permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position, and the settlement would include a provision requiring the HOA to implement new governance procedures and fair enforcement policies. Additionally, Patricia would personally pay $15,000 and issue a written apology. Mitchell presented the offer to me, along with his analysis. "It's a reasonable settlement," he said. "If we go to trial, we might get more, but there's always risk. The insurance company has deep pockets, but juries can be unpredictable. On the other hand, this settlement ensures real structural change in the HOA and gets you significant compensation without the stress of another trial." What about Patricia? Does she face any consequences beyond the $15,000? "She has a criminal record now. She's been removed from the HOA, and she'll be permanently banned from leadership positions. Her reputation in the community is destroyed. Sometimes the best victory is knowing the other person can never hurt you or anyone else again." After discussing it with Mitchell and sleeping on it, I decided to accept the settlement. The total of $100,000, minus Mitchell's fees and expenses, would give me enough to pay off a significant chunk of my mortgage and cover all the costs I had incurred during this nightmare. More importantly, the changes to the HOA would protect other residents from experiencing what I had gone through. The settlement was finalized on March 15th. As part of the agreement, Patricia had to provide a written apology, which Mitchell insisted be specific and detailed. When I received it, I was surprised by how genuinely remorseful it seemed, though I had no way of knowing if the sentiment was real or just legally necessary. "Dear Mr. Rollins, I am writing to offer my sincere and unqualified apology for my actions toward you. When I served as president of the Sundance Hills HOA, I allowed my personal feelings and need for control to override my duty to serve the community fairly. I targeted you with excessive violations, I harassed you, and I ultimately committed criminal acts against you that were indefensible. My behavior was not the result of your actions, but of my own insecurity and inability to handle challenges to my authority. You had every right to question the violations, to hire an attorney, and to expect to be treated fairly as a homeowner in the community. Instead of responding professionally, I escalated the situation and caused you significant harm, both financially and emotionally. I am deeply sorry for the stress, anxiety, and fear I caused you. I am sorry for damaging your property, for disrupting your peace, and for making you feel unsafe in your own home. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I take full responsibility for it. I hope that in time you can find some measure of peace, and I assure you that I will never contact you or interfere with your life again. I am getting the help I need to address my issues, and I am committed to making amends for the harm I have caused. Sincerely, Patricia Whitmore. Reading it, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at what she had put me through, satisfaction that she had been held accountable, but also a strange sadness. Patricia had destroyed her own life through her actions, and while she deserved the consequences, there was something tragic about watching someone self-destruct so completely. Life slowly returned to normal after the settlement. George Marsh proved to be an excellent HOA president, running the organization with transparency and fairness. He implemented monthly open meetings where residents could voice concerns, created a clear process for violations that included warnings before fines, and established an independent appeal board. The atmosphere in Sundance Hills improved dramatically. Several of the residents who had testified in the case became friends. Frank and I started having dinner once a week, and Sandra's son, who loved construction equipment, would come watch whenever I had my work truck in the driveway, asking endless questions about the tools and machines. The neighborhood felt like an actual community rather than a prison camp. I used part of the settlement money to create a scholarship fund for students interested in the skilled trades, naming it the Sundance Hills Community Fund. It felt right to turn something negative into something that would help others, and several residents contributed additional funds to grow it. About 6 months after the settlement, I ran into Patricia at a grocery store in the next town over. She was alone, pushing a cart, and she looked different, softer somehow, less rigid. When she saw me, she froze, and I could see the panic in her eyes, probably worried I would think she was violating the restraining order. I gave her a brief nod and continued walking. I had no interest in speaking with her, but I also had no desire to make the moment harder than it already was. She had lost enough, and I had moved on. As I drove home that day, past the Sundance Hills entrance sign and down Sycamore Lane to my house, I thought about everything that had happened. I had bought this house looking for the American dream, the peaceful suburban life. Instead, I had gotten a nightmare that taught me hard lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and the reality that sometimes the people who are supposed to serve a community can become tyrants when given even small amounts of power. But I had also learned about resilience, about community, and about the fact that most people, when given the chance, want to do the right thing. The neighbors who testified, George taking over and implementing real change, even Patricia's eventual acknowledgement of her wrongdoing, all of it suggested that redemption and progress were possible. My lawn was immaculate now, maintained exactly to HOA specifications, not because I was afraid of violations, but because I took pride in my home. My garage, repainted a tasteful gray, showed no signs of the vandalism. The house numbers were still in brushed nickel Helvetica, 4 inches tall, exactly where they were supposed to be. But more importantly, I could park my work truck in my driveway without fear. I could plant whatever flowers I wanted. I could live in my home without constantly looking over my shoulder or waiting for the next violation notice. I had fought for that freedom, and it had cost me time, money, and peace of mind. Was it worth it? Sitting on my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple, I decided that yes, it absolutely was. Because the alternative would have been to live in fear, to accept bullying and harassment, to let someone else's need for control dictate how I lived in my own home. I had stood up to Patricia Whitmore. I had fought back when she tried to destroy my peace, and I had won. Not just for myself, but for Frank, for Sandra, for everyone in Sundance Hills who had suffered under her reign. The settlement money would run out eventually, but the changes to the HOA would last. Future residents would benefit from policies put in place because I had refused to back down. Mitchell called me that evening to check in, something he did periodically even though our professional relationship had ended. "How are you doing, Xavier?" he asked. "Good," I said, and I meant it. Really good. No regrets about going through with everything, not a single one. Good. You know, in my 20 years of practicing law, I've seen a lot of people back down from fights they should have had. Fear, exhaustion, cost, there are always reasons to give up. You didn't, and you made a real difference. That's rare. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at the spreadsheet I had been keeping since day one. Every violation, every fine, every interaction with Patricia, all documented with dates, times, and evidence. It was a habit I had maintained even after the settlement, just in case. But looking at it now, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The fight was over. Patricia was gone. The HOA was operating fairly. I could let go of the vigilance that had consumed me for so many months. I selected all the files, paused for a moment, then moved them to an archived folder labeled Sundance Hills Case Closed. It felt good, final. The next morning, I woke up without immediately checking my security cameras. I made coffee, read the news, and prepared for work without that constant underlying anxiety that had become so familiar. It was a normal morning in a normal house in a normal neighborhood, which was exactly what I had wanted all along. As I loaded my tools into my truck preparing for a job in Scottsdale, Frank walked past with his dog. "Morning, Xavier," he called out. "Morning, Frank. Hey, a bunch of us are having a barbecue this weekend. You should come. Bring a date if you've got one," I smiled. "I'll be there." "Good." It's about time this neighborhood started feeling like a place people actually want to live. He continued down the street, and I finished loading the truck. Before getting in, I took a moment to look at my house, really look at it. The blue-gray siding I had chosen, the white trim, the small garden I had finally been able to plant with the flowers I actually liked, not the HOA-approved list. It was mine. I had fought for it, and now I could truly enjoy it. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia's actions, intended to drive me away, had instead made me more invested in the neighborhood than I ever would have been otherwise. I knew my neighbors now, knew their stories, and cared about the community in a way that went beyond property values and covenant compliance. As I drove out of Sundance Hills that morning, I passed 1247 Sycamore Lane. Patricia's house looked the same as always, well-maintained and perfect from the outside. But I knew she no longer lived there. According to neighborhood gossip, she had moved to Flagstaff to live with her sister, unable to face the daily reminder of everything she had lost. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I didn't mourn it either. She had made her choices and consequences had followed. That was justice, simple and clear. The months turned into a year and life went on. The Sundance Hills Community Fund gave its first scholarship to a young woman interested in becoming an electrician. The HOA, under George's leadership, won an award from the city for community improvement initiatives. My business grew, and I hired 2 new employees. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, but I was content. The house that had been the source of so much stress had become a real home, a place I looked forward to returning to each evening. I hosted game nights, had neighbors over for dinner, and even served on the HOA's Architectural Review Committee, helping to evaluate requests for home modifications with fairness and common sense. One evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. "Mr. Rollins, you don't know me, but I just closed on a house in Sundance Hills. During the buying process, I learned about the HOA changes that were implemented after your case. I'm a single father with 2 young kids and I work from home. Under the old rules, I would have been terrified of constant violations and fines. But the new procedures, the fair enforcement, the reasonable approach, it all made me comfortable buying here. I just wanted to say thank you for standing up and fighting for change. You made it possible for families like mine to live here without fear. That matters more than you probably know. Sincerely, Marcus Thompson." I read the email 3 times, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. This was why it had all been worth it. Not for the settlement money, not for the satisfaction of defeating Patricia, but for this, knowing that someone else could move into Sundance Hills and just live their life without harassment. I replied to Marcus, welcoming him to the neighborhood and offering to help if he ever needed anything. Then I forwarded the email to Mitchell with a simple message. "This is what we did." His response came quickly. "This is what you did, Xavier. I just helped you do it. Be proud." And I was proud. I was proud that I had stood up for myself, proud that I had turned a terrible situation into positive change, and proud that I could walk through my neighborhood with my head high, knowing I had nothing to be ashamed of. The story of the HOA president who threw garbage on my lawn and got herself arrested became neighborhood legend. New residents would hear about it and look at me with a mixture of awe and amusement. Some probably thought I had overreacted, that I should have just moved or dealt with it quietly. But most understood that sometimes you have to draw a line and say, no more. Patricia Whitmore had thrown garbage on my yard, thinking she could intimidate me into leaving or submission. Instead, I had returned it to her porch with a note from my lawyer, and that single act of standing up for myself had set in motion events that changed an entire community for the better. As I sit here now, 2 years after that morning when I found my lawn covered in rotting trash, I can honestly say I wouldn't change a thing. The stress, the cost, the sleepless nights, they were all necessary parts of a journey that taught me who I was and what I was capable of. My name is Xavier Rollins. I own a beautiful home in Sundance Hills, Arizona, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And if anyone ever tries to dump garbage on my lawn again, well, I have a lawyer on speed dial and security cameras covering every inch of my property. But something tells me that won't be necessary. Because the message has been sent and received loud and clear throughout the neighborhood and beyond. Homeowners have rights, bullies will be held accountable, and sometimes the best response to someone trying to bury you in garbage is to hand it right back with a lawyer's letter attached. That's the American dream I was looking for after all. Not perfection, but justice. Not peace at any cost, but the freedom to stand up for yourself and know that the system, for all its flaws, will back you up when you're in the right. And every time I pull into my driveway, see my house standing proud and beautiful, and wave to neighbors who have become true friends, I'm reminded that the fight was worth it. Every single moment of it.